Anyone would think men are on a permanently downward spiral. Apparently, almost half of young men say they don't even know what it means to be a man anymore. You can hardly blame them considering all the mixed messages out there. Be a man, but at the same time, don't, because masculinity is toxic. It's like we're all meant to be apologizing for something we personally didn't do.
Could I maybe get that headset, please?
Do not raise your voice to me, sir.
I wasn't raising my voice.
Okay, just calm down.
I'm calm!
I was kind of hoping these things might change back when the pandemic first hit, that we'd somehow end up in survival mode where manly things had to be done, but it didn't exactly pan out that way. Instead of fighting zombies or surviving out in the woods, there was no real danger and the government stepped in. Being stuck inside under the threat of fines with no toilet paper was the height of it. So much for being a man when trouble arrives. We just got more government overreach and anxiety visiting the bathroom. Actually, a major comeback has to happen at some point because civilizational collapse caused by low fertility is already underway. What's happening is that we're repeating an ancient cycle of civilizational rise and fall. The patterns we're seeing now aren't so different from the downfall of Rome, the Mayans, the Greeks, or the Carthaginians. It goes like this. Rising prosperity eventually gives way to apathy and low fertility. In turn, this leads to societal collapse or a takeover by foreign powers, and with it, a renewed reliance on men. And when women turn back to men, fertility rises again. That's how societies recover. History makes it clear there will come a day when women will want men once again, when they will respect and value us much as they did in the past. That return is what restores families, pushes fertility back up, and gives civilization another chance. The current situation where men are taken for granted and treated as disposable or even toxic is an era that will pass. It must pass. Technically, a revival of men and fertility could happen if society chose to course correct. What I mean is women might come to realize they actually need men. This could be part of a cultural renaissance that restores fertility to replacement levels. But seriously, does anyone believe that's going to happen? I don't think today's hardcore feminists would be happy even in a full-blown matriarchy where men were reduced to slaves. They would still find something to complain about. The more likely pathway is darker. It would mean women turning back to men for help, but only after population collapse had already decimated our economic systems and quality of life. This is the scenario with loads of historical precedent, and it may not be as far away as many people think. Society is already collapsing because the relationship between men and women is so broken. It's got to the stage where many men are choosing to go their own way, even as a fertility disaster is forming. It's not great out there unless you're kind of hoping for a disaster ahead. The largest economies in the world all have fertility rates below replacement. The US, China, Japan, Germany, and even India aren't producing enough babies to sustain their populations over the long term. Human reproduction is on a persistent downward trend that is already causing many villages and towns to be abandoned. Living standards will generally decline as societies become old and fragmented. Peoples such as Koreans, Japanese, and Italians seem almost destined to disappear with lifetime birth rates of around 1 child per woman, or even lower. But can things really get so bad that men are actually treated with respect and appreciation again? I'd say yes, because it happened last century. Look at the baby boom following World War II. And remember, this wasn't just in countries reduced to rubble. It happened in places that barely saw fighting at home, such as Australia, the US, and Canada. Sometimes it's forgotten that birth rates were already sliding back in the 1920s. America was down to around 2.5 children per woman, well below earlier generations. Australia was on a similar track. It was an age of consumerism and political apathy. A little like today, people were caught up in urban living and new inventions, not building large families. Fertility fell even further when the Great Depression hit in 1929. Men lost good jobs and many became unemployed, driving down their ability to be husbands and fathers. But the Second World War came along, and this became the making of the so-called greatest generation. Men were mobilized on a scale never seen before, either as soldiers overseas or in factories and farms at home. National pride was tied to their roles, and the image of the returning servicemen became heroic. When the war ended, uniforms carried authority. Films and newspapers celebrated the soldier, and communities welcomed men home with respect. In America, the GI Bill gave veterans education and housing. In Australia, men came back to land grants and rebuilding schemes. They weren't on the margins, they were at the centre of national life. Women married young, often within a few years of the war ending. Families started quickly, and fertility didn't just recover, it surged. By the late 1950s, American women were averaging nearly 4 children each, and Australian women were close behind at around 3.5. Were the greatest generation better than men today? Maybe, maybe not, but they and the subsequent silent generations certainly had it better after the war. Young men were surrounded by young women eager to marry and have children, and almost everyone did. A man didn't have to trawl dating apps hoping for a single swipe right, or spend years building himself up just to get a little respect. A basic difference back then was that women knew exactly what men were capable of. Every female appreciated that males were prepared to give up their lives fighting on behalf of the women and children of their country. They also thought the average man could kill other men in lethal combat for the same noble cause. How could you disrespect that? Every man was a potential hero. Men were needed to keep the bad guys away. But it wasn't just the elevation of man's status as a protector that fueled the baby boom. Men were also cherished as providers. Wartime had shifted economies toward manufacturing, the making of stuff, which depended on manpower. Added to this was the dream of an idyllic suburban life built around family, a house with a yard, a car in the driveway, and children filling the home with laughter. For a young woman, landing a man meant getting hold of one of these capable men, creating a family together, and enjoying the vision of better times ahead as his supportive wife. All she had to do was give herself up to him, and she could expect to live extremely well. Around 90% of women had kids, and only about a fifth of those chose to work. Women actually dreamed of being a wife and mother as a kind of bliss, with anything else like travel and career seen just as a bonus. Anyway, let's get into why we were breeding like rabbits in the post-war period. Biological and evolutionary forces were at play, and some of those same conditions could return in the future, even in a world of AI, robots, and doom-scrolling as civilization slides towards a depopulated abyss. If there's to be hope for humanity, fertility has to rebound, and that means a male comeback at least vaguely resembling what happened before. On the topic of hope, this has to be part of the comeback formula. The promise of a better life is a fertility driver. It's about the vision. When a man looks like he can build a future, women want to be part of it. You see this even now in countries where people still believe tomorrow will be better than today. Look at Israel, surrounded by enemies, under constant threat, but still one of the most optimistic nations on earth and the most fertile in the developed world. Sub-Saharan Africa is poor and chaotic, but people there still believe in community and children as the way forward, and fertility is sky high. Now compare these regions to South Korea or Japan, safe, wealthy, stable, but the future looks like a grind, with long hours of study or work. Hope has collapsed, and so has fertility. It's not wealth or stability that drives people to have kids, it's belief in a future worth living. And men are the backbone of that belief when society needs building up. In a depopulated, crumbling world, men can become symbols of hope for women again. They don't just offer strength or protection, they offer family, tangible resistance against the falling tide. Hope may also rise as the harshest feminists lose their voice. Let's be blunt. The first people to vanish from the gene pool will be the anti-natalist feminists. They're the ones who frame children as a burden, treat men as optional, and look down on family life. That kind of outlook kills hope. And without hope, there's no future. Their line ends with them. It won't happen all at once, but over time, weakening feminism will spark a cultural correction. The women who value men, family, and children will be the ones whose values survive. That means a gradual return to traditional feminine roles, not because men demand it, but because nature and culture reward it. Feminist doctrine won't be the only set of values in decline. I believe we'll also move past the idea that people everywhere are basically the same and interchangeable. The threat of disappearing will force it. We probably won't see the kind of national pride that war brings, but women will begin to prize men who are local and ethnically similar. We're evolved to prefer mates who are somewhat like us, and that instinct can only grow stronger when survival feels at stake. We've already seen the evidence. Fertility competition rises when groups feel pressure from rivals. Israel versus Palestinians, Catholics versus Protestants in Northern Ireland. In the Balkans, ethnic rivalry meant women had children to ensure their own people survived. In a world of collapsing populations, those same instincts will surface everywhere. Women will get over globalist ideals and pay greater attention to men who represent continuity of their people. And this will only intensify if outsiders begin moving into depopulated lands. Fear of losing cultural identity will push women toward local men. The attraction won't just be about an individual's qualities, it will be about what he represents. History shows this dynamic clearly. On frontiers where settlers and natives overlapped, or in occupied territories, women sought security from men of their own group. In the future, as populations contract and migration grows, the same pressures will revive old instincts. A man becomes a symbol of family, heritage, and community survival. Finally, let's get to the ultimate endgame. If population collapse continues for long enough, eventually civilization will break, and men will be the ones to pick up the pieces. It's easy to forget that men built the modern world and still quietly keep it running. They lay the tracks and drive the trains. They work the factories that produce the parts no one thinks about until they're gone. They climb poles after storms to put the power back on. They dig the tunnels, repair the bridges, and keep the water flowing. Civilization depends on a million jobs like this, done mostly by men every day without applause. As populations shrink, those jobs won't get easier, they'll get harder. Men will be needed not just to keep a declining economy alive, but to rebuild one when it falls apart. Our status as protectors and providers will grow again, and when men are respected and wanted, fertility will rise. That's the cycle history has shown us again and again. Society has grown very comfortable with technology and the benefits of a world that kept getting bigger, but the intricate devices, supply chains, and infrastructure that sustain modern life are fragile. We can't import parts from Korea when that population is counted in thousands instead of tens of millions. Supplies from China could be cut off as their numbers shrink and they hoard resources for themselves. A declining population makes every challenge harder to overcome. Economies of scale revert to costs of smallness. To the extent that civilization does break, men will be needed. Toughness, technical skills, specialization, and even physical strength, the things that make men, men, will be in short supply in a world made up mostly of the elderly. The skills and qualities of women will be needed too, but no more than those of men, and no one will think we are surplus to requirements. And that, my friends, is how men will rise after society falls. No one can predict the future with certainty, and success and failure won't be spread evenly. Each nation will respond to the challenges in its own way, but the downtrend for men will bottom out and eventually reverse. That much is inevitable.